The truth didn't come out because she exposed it. That was the irony of it. She never raised her voice, never shared screenshots, never told her side publicly. The truth came out because lies can't survive daylight forever. It started with a conversation she wasn't part of. A mutual friend, someone Daniel trusted, asked her gently over coffee, "Are you okay? Really?" She paused, then nodded. "Yes," she said. Not, "I'm trying," not, "I'm surviving," just, "yes." That answer spread faster than any accusation ever could. People noticed her composure, the way she carried the baby with confidence, the way she spoke calmly without bitterness, the way she never explained, yet never denied. Her silence invited curiosity, and curiosity uncovered everything. Daniel, meanwhile, was unraveling publicly, not dramatically, but visibly. He stopped attending gatherings, stopped being invited, stopped being defended. When his name came up, conversations shifted. Someone always changed the subject. Someone always looked uncomfortable. Silence followed him now, the same silence he had once mistaken for safety. The first direct confrontation came from someone unexpected, a colleague's spouse. "I just wanted you to know," the woman said quietly, standing on his doorstep. "I know." Daniel didn't deny it, didn't apologize. He just stood there, hollow. "I thought you should hear it from me," she continued. "She didn't deserve it. She didn't say, 'your wife.' She didn't need to." At the same time, she was being seen differently, not as a victim, as a woman who had endured quietly and emerged intact. People approached her with respect, not pity. That distinction mattered. One afternoon, Daniel overheard someone say, "She handled it with so much grace." The words hit harder than insults ever could have. Grace. He had expected anger, drama, public destruction. What he hadn't expected was dignity. Daniel realized something devastating then. He wasn't being punished. He was being excluded from trust, from respect, from the future he once assumed was guaranteed. And exclusion, he learned too late, lasts longer than anger. That night, as he watched her laugh softly with the baby, he felt regret in its final form. Not panic, not fear, but the unbearable awareness that some doors don't slam shut. They close quietly and never open again. Humiliation doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrives with absence. Daniel felt it when invitations stopped coming, when group chats went silent, when people who once sought his opinion now avoided even small talk. No one confronted him. No one argued. They simply adjusted their lives to exclude him. At a small gathering he hadn't realized he was no longer welcome at, he arrived late, too late to pretend nothing had changed. Conversations slowed when he entered, not abruptly, just enough. Someone excused themselves. Another checked their phone. He stood there holding a drink he didn't want, surrounded by people who no longer saw him as safe. He left early. No one noticed. Meanwhile, she experienced the opposite. People leaned toward her when she spoke, listened carefully, respected the pauses in her sentences. They didn't ask invasive questions. They didn't demand explanations. They simply treated her like someone whose silence meant depth, not denial. That difference mattered. One afternoon, a neighbor stopped her during a walk. "I just wanted to say," the woman said gently, "you've handled everything beautifully." She smiled politely. "Thank you." There was no pride in her expression, just calm. Daniel watched from a distance. That smile, soft, contained, hurt more than anger ever could have. He tried once more to control the narrative, reached out to an old friend. "I'm not a bad person," he said desperately. The reply came hours later. "I know, but you made bad choices, and people are allowed to respond to that." There was no cruelty in the message. That made it worse. At home, he grew restless, paced, checked his phone compulsively, replayed conversations that no longer mattered. She noticed, but did not intervene. She had learned something essential. You cannot rescue someone from consequences without drowning yourself. The baby laughed loudly one morning, a clear, joyful sound. She laughed back, surprised by how easily it came now. Daniel stood nearby, smiling reflexively, then stopped. He realized something painful. The baby's joy wasn't tied to him. It existed independently, just like her peace. One evening, he asked quietly, "Do people think I'm a monster?" She didn't answer immediately. Then she said, "No." Relief flickered across his face. "They think you're human," she continued, "and humans are judged by what they do when it matters." The relief vanished. Publicly, the story settled into place. Not sensational, not exaggerated, just accepted. He had betrayed his wife during her most vulnerable time. That fact stood alone, no embellishment required, and facts, once accepted, are immovable. He noticed how people spoke of her now, with so much strength, so composed, so dignified, and of him, they didn't speak at all. That silence followed him home, followed him into empty job searches, into sleepless nights, into mirrors he avoided. He understood now. Her silence had protected her. His silence now punished him. Late one night, he stood outside the nursery again, listening, watching. She was reading softly to the baby, her voice steady. He wanted to step inside, to say something meaningful, to matter again. But he didn't move, because deep down he knew the truth had already come out, and there was nothing left to explain. The reckoning didn't arrive as a single moment. It unfolded slowly, like a tide that never rushed, never retreated. Daniel learned what it meant to live on the outside of other people's trust. Not hated, just excluded. He stopped correcting people, stopped defending himself, because every explanation sounded hollow, even to him. He had once believed that if he stayed quiet, everything would pass. He hadn't understood that silence only works when it's paired with integrity. Her silence had been strong. His had been cowardly. One afternoon, he overheard two people talking at a cafe. "She never said a bad word about him," someone remarked. "That's what makes it worse," another replied. "She didn't have to." Daniel sat frozen. That was the moment he understood fully. She hadn't won by destroying him. She had won by outgrowing him. At home, life continued with quiet rhythm. Feedings, work calls, laughter that came easier now. She no longer braced herself emotionally, no longer scanned the room for disappointment. She had accepted something profound. The truth didn't change her life, it clarified it. Daniel tried once more, his final attempt. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said one evening, voice low. "I just want to know if I mattered at all." She didn't answer immediately. She finished folding the baby's clothes, placed them neatly in the drawer. Then she turned to him. "You mattered," she said gently. "That's why this hurt." He swallowed hard. "But I don't build my life around pain anymore." Those words closed something forever. From that day on, he stopped asking. And she stopped explaining. The world adjusted naturally. Invitations came addressed to her. Opportunities opened for her. Respect followed her quietly, without demand. Daniel watched from a distance, no longer angry, no longer defensive, just aware. Awareness was the final form of regret. One evening, as she walked with the baby under a soft orange sky, she felt something unfamiliar. Lightness. Not joy exactly. Not relief. Freedom. She hadn't screamed, hadn't exposed, hadn't destroyed. She had simply endured and then moved forward. Daniel stood alone in the house that once felt full. The silence now belonged to him. And for the first time, he understood what she had lived with for so long. The difference was, she had turned silence into strength. He had turned it into loss. The truth had come out, not as a weapon, as a mirror. And everyone, including Daniel, had been forced to see what was always there. The fall didn't feel dramatic. It felt slow, like standing still while the ground quietly disappeared beneath your feet. Daniel woke up one morning with nowhere to go. No meetings, no deadlines, no purpose waiting on the other side of the door. The silence in the house was louder than any alarm clock had ever been. He checked his email obsessively. Rejections, silence, auto replies. Every message felt like a reminder of who he used to be and who he no longer was. The world had moved on without asking his permission. Money began to feel heavy, not scarce yet, just fragile. He watched numbers more closely now. Bills felt accusatory. Groceries felt expensive. Every purchase came with a calculation he had never needed before. She noticed, but she didn't comment. Not because she didn't care, because she had already adjusted. She had found rhythm in her new life. Work calls scheduled around naps, deadlines met quietly, progress made without announcement. She didn't boast, she didn't explain, she simply did what needed to be done. Daniel watched her from the edges of rooms. Her confidence unsettled him, not because she was doing well, but because she was doing well without him. One afternoon, he overheard her on a work call. "Yes, that timeline works. I'll have it ready by Friday. Thank you, I appreciate the flexibility." Her voice was steady, professional, grounded. When the call ended, she smiled at the baby, warm, genuine. That contrast pierced him. She had built a life that didn't include his instability. His job search grew desperate. He lowered expectations, changed titles, expanded locations. Still, nothing. He ran into a former colleague at a cafe. They exchanged polite greetings. "So, what are you up to now?" the colleague asked. Daniel hesitated. "Looking," he replied. The pause that followed said everything. At home, the dynamic shifted further. She paid bills without discussion, managed schedules alone, handled emergencies calmly. He realized then, he wasn't just unemployed, he was unnecessary. One evening, he asked quietly, "Do you resent me?" She thought about it. "No," she answered honestly. "I resent the version of myself that thought love meant endurance." That answer stayed with him long after the conversation ended. Financial pressure tightened. Savings shrank. Options narrowed. He began selling things he once considered permanent: watches, electronics, pieces of a life he had assumed was stable. Each sale felt like an erasure. Meanwhile, she continued forward, She took the baby to new places, made new routines, built new confidence. Daniel noticed how people spoke to her differently now, with respect, with trust. He noticed how they spoke to him, briefly, carefully, as if he were something fragile. Late one night, sitting alone in the dark, Daniel finally admitted something to himself. This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was consequence, unfolding exactly as it was meant to. And the hardest part wasn't losing status. It was watching her rise quietly from the ruins he created. The days began to blur together for Daniel. Morning felt no different from night. Time no longer moved in goals or progress, only in reminders of what he had lost. He stopped setting alarms. There was nowhere he needed to be.
Financial strain stopped being theoretical. The savings account dipped below numbers that once felt untouchable. He stared at the screen longer than necessary, hoping the balance might change if he waited. It didn't. When the credit card statement arrived, he folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer, as if hiding it might delay reality. She noticed the shift before he said anything, the way he hesitated before opening mail, the way he flinched at notifications, the way he stopped offering to buy things, even small ones. She didn't comment. She adjusted. Again. One evening, the baby needed something unexpectedly, medicine, urgently. She reached for her wallet without thinking, paid, handled it. Daniel stood beside her, silent. "I was going to," he began. She shook her head gently. "It's okay," she said. The kindness in her voice hurt more than accusation, because kindness meant she expected nothing from him anymore. Social isolation deepened. Friends stopped calling, not out of cruelty, out of discomfort. People didn't know what to say to someone whose life had unraveled so publicly, so they said nothing. Daniel learned how loud nothing could be. He tried once to reconnect, sent a message to an old friend. "Want to grab coffee sometime?" The reply came hours later. "Things are busy right now, maybe another time." There was no follow-up. There never was. Meanwhile, she was building something new. Not loudly, not ambitiously, but steadily. She joined a small community group, other parents, professionals, people who didn't know her history. They knew her only as she was now, capable, thoughtful, present. Daniel watched from the outside as she laughed easily with them. She didn't glance back to see if he noticed. She didn't need validation anymore. One afternoon, he overheard her talking to someone on the phone. "I'm proud of myself," she said quietly. The words stopped him cold. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt pride, real pride, without ego attached to it. That realization cut deep. His sense of identity began to erode. Without work, without respect, without the family role he once assumed was secure. He was left with himself, and he didn't like what he found there. Late at night, he replayed old memories. Her silence during pregnancy, her calm during labor, her composure when the truth came out. He had mistaken restraint for weakness. Now he understood it had been strength, disciplined, intentional, unshakable. He compared their trajectories constantly. Her life, narrowing in focus but growing in depth. His life, wide with regret, empty of direction. The contrast was unbearable. One night he said quietly, almost to himself, "I should have been better." She heard him. She didn't respond, not because she disagreed, but because some realizations arrived too late to change anything. As the house grew quieter and his world smaller, Daniel understood the true nature of his fall. It wasn't losing his career, it wasn't losing status. It was losing the right to stand beside someone who had become stronger because of what he failed to be. The breaking point didn't come with a crisis. It came with a number. Daniel stared at the bank screen in disbelief. The account balance sat lower than he had ever seen it. Not dangerous yet, but close enough to fear, close enough to humility, close enough to understanding. He didn't tell her immediately. Not out of pride, out of shame. He spent the day pacing the house, calculating expenses in his head, replaying conversations he wished he could undo. When she came home with the baby, groceries in hand, he noticed something painful. She hadn't hesitated at the store. She hadn't checked prices twice. She hadn't worried. She had already adjusted her life to stability without him. That night, he finally spoke. "I'm running out," he said quietly. She looked at him calmly. "Of what?" "Money," he admitted. "Options." She nodded slowly. "I know," she said. Not, "I'm sorry," not, "we'll fix this," just, "I know." That response broke something inside him. For the first time, he asked the question he had avoided. "Do you still see me as family?" She thought carefully. "You're the baby's father," she replied, "and you're someone I once loved." The pause after that sentence was long. "But I don't build my future around you anymore." There it was, the truth, complete and unsoftened. He tried to help more. Cleaned, cooked, offered rides. She accepted when useful, ignored when unnecessary. His presence had become conditional, not central. That was the deepest loss of all. One afternoon, he sat alone in the living room, surrounded by half-packed boxes. Things he planned to sell. Things that once defined him. He held an old watch in his hand. Expensive, unnecessary. He remembered buying it to celebrate a promotion, a life he had assumed would only grow. He placed it gently in the box. Another piece gone. She watched him from the doorway once, not with satisfaction, not with anger, with neutrality. And neutrality, he realized, was worse than hatred. Hatred meant emotion. Neutrality meant closure. Later that night, after the baby slept, he sat on the floor, back against the wall. "I don't recognize my life," he said quietly. She didn't respond immediately. Then she said, "I didn't either, for a long time." He looked up. "That's the difference," she continued softly. "I rebuilt mine." In that moment, Daniel understood something with brutal clarity. He wasn't watching her leave. He was watching her arrive at a version of herself that no longer required his presence. The house felt temporary now, like a place he was borrowing time in. He began to understand that soon, very soon, he would be the one moving out. Not because she demanded it, but because there was no longer space for him where her life was going. That night, alone with his thoughts, Daniel finally accepted the truth he had resisted for so long. His fall hadn't begun when he lost his job or his reputation. It had begun the moment he betrayed someone who chose silence to protect life and strength to protect herself. Her life didn't transform overnight. There was no dramatic turning point, no sudden happiness, just momentum. And momentum, once it starts, is difficult to stop. She woke up earlier now, not because the baby demanded it, but because her mind was clear. Purpose does that. It reorganizes time. She built her days carefully. Work calls scheduled with intention, breaks planned around feedings, evenings protected. Her life no longer felt like survival. It felt like direction. Daniel noticed the change immediately. The way she dressed, not to impress, but to move freely. The way she spoke, with certainty instead of hesitation. The way she carried herself, grounded, steady, unafraid. She didn't look lighter, she was lighter. Her work began to grow. Small acknowledgments at first, a thank you email, a recommendation passed quietly, another contract. Nothing flashy, but consistent. She built stability the same way she had endured pain, patiently. One afternoon, Daniel overheard her on a call. "I can take on more responsibility," she said calmly. "Yes, I'm confident I can manage it." Confidence, not hope, not desperation. Certainty. The word echoed in his chest. She started meeting new people, other parents, colleagues, people who knew nothing about her past. They met her as she was now, not as someone recovering, not as someone betrayed, just capable. Daniel watched her laugh easily with them. That hurt in a way nothing else had, because her laughter no longer carried pain. She stopped checking in with him emotionally. No updates, no explanations, no seeking approval. If she needed something practical, she asked. If not, she moved on. That was the hardest adjustment of all. One evening, he tried to reconnect. "You seem happier," he said carefully. She considered the word. "I'm more stable," she replied. "Happiness grows from that." The answer wasn't cruel, it was honest. And honesty, without attachment, can be devastating. She began taking the baby on longer walks, new routes, new parks, places Daniel had never suggested, never explored. She created memories that didn't include him. Not intentionally, naturally. At night, after the baby slept, she worked quietly at the table. Focused. Calm. Daniel sat across the room, watching the woman she had become. He realized something painful then. This version of her would never have tolerated the version of him that existed before. She had outgrown him, not in anger, but in awareness. The first real success came quietly, a promotion in responsibility, a raise, not large, but meaningful. She read the email twice, then closed the laptop and sat still for a moment. Not celebrating, reflecting. She whispered to herself, "I did this. Not we, I." Daniel saw the shift. The confidence wasn't borrowed. It wasn't temporary. It was earned. And it didn't need him. That night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He remembered who she had been during pregnancy. Quiet, patient, enduring. He had mistaken that version for fragile. Now he understood she had been becoming, and he had been in the way. She didn't announce her growth, didn't demand recognition. She simply lived forward, and Daniel, standing still, was forced to watch as the woman he betrayed rose into a life that no longer had space for him. With stability came something she hadn't felt in a long time. Choice. Not the desperate kind, not the forced kind, real choice. She began saying no. No to extra work that drained her, no to conversations that circled the past, no to emotional labor she no longer owed anyone. Each no made room for something better, for rest, for clarity, for self-respect. Her confidence showed up in subtle ways. She no longer rushed when she spoke, no longer filled silence with explanations, no longer apologized for taking up space. People noticed, not because she demanded attention, but because grounded people always draw it. Daniel felt the shift most acutely when she stopped consulting him, not about decisions, not about plans, not about the future. She informed him when necessary. That was all. The difference between being consulted and being informed felt enormous. One evening, she told him calmly, "I'm thinking of moving closer to work." The sentence wasn't a threat, it was logistics. "When?" he asked quietly. "Soon," she replied. He nodded, absorbing the weight of that word. Soon meant without him. He tried to imagine her life without him in it, not hypothetically, practically. Her mornings, her routines, her circle. He realized something devastating. He didn't fit anywhere in it anymore. She had begun rebuilding her identity, not around loss, but around intention. She wasn't a woman who had been betrayed. She was a woman who had survived betrayal and chosen growth over bitterness. That distinction mattered. One afternoon, she received an invitation, a professional event, networking, opportunities. She hesitated, then accepted. Daniel noticed the confidence with which she prepared. Not nervous, ready. "You don't seem scared," he remarked. "I've already lived through the worst," she replied calmly. "This is just forward." At the event, she stood tall, spoke clearly, listened attentively. People responded to her presence, not her story. They didn't know her pain. They only knew her capability. And that felt liberating. When she returned home, Daniel watched her set her bag down, move easily through the space. She looked like someone who belonged fully to herself. That realization struck him deeply. He had loved a woman who hadn't yet known her own power. Now she did, and she no longer needed him to feel complete. That night, he asked the question he had been avoiding. "Do you ever think about us?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately. Then she said, "Sometimes." Hope flickered. "But," she continued gently, "I think about who I was becoming, not what I lost." The hope vanished. She spent more time imagining her future, not dramatically, simply. A home filled with calm, a career built on respect, a child growing up watching strength modeled quietly. None of those visions included resentment. None included revenge. They included peace. Daniel understood something final then. He wasn't watching her rise to spite him. He was watching her rise because she had chosen herself. And that choice had nothing to do with him anymore. Her self-worth had returned, not loudly, not defiantly, but fully. And from a distance, Daniel realized the most painful truth of all. He hadn't lost her when the affair was exposed. He lost her when she discovered who she was without him. The separation didn't come with papers. It came with distance. Distance that no longer hurt because it had already done its work. She moved out on a clear, quiet morning. No arguments, no scenes, boxes packed neatly. Essentials only. Daniel stood in the doorway, unsure whether to help or stay out of the way. She didn't ask either. She had already done the emotional moving months ago. As she placed the baby's things in the car, she moved with calm efficiency. No shaking hands, no tears, just intention. Daniel watched, feeling the finality settle into his chest. "You don't hate me," he said quietly. She looked at him. "No," she replied. "I don't need to." That answer hurt more than hatred ever could have. Before leaving, she turned once, just once. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" he asked, confused. "For showing me who I had to become." Then she closed the door. The house felt hollow after she left. Not empty, hollow. Like a place that had been lived in deeply and then outgrown. Her new space was smaller, simpler, but it felt like hers. She set the baby down, opened the windows, and let fresh air fill the room. She breathed deeply. This was not escape. This was arrival. She settled into her new life with quiet confidence. Work continued, routines formed, stability grew. She didn't look back, not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer defined her. Daniel watched from afar. Occasional updates, brief interactions. She was polite, focused, unreachable. He began to understand something he had resisted. He was not her present. He was her past. One evening, alone in the old house, he finally said the words out loud. "I lost her." There was no anger in his voice, only truth. He replayed her silence during pregnancy, her calm during labor, her dignity during exposure, her strength during rebuilding. He realized then she hadn't endured him because she was weak. She had endured because she was becoming someone who didn't need to fight. Her rise wasn't loud, it wasn't public, but it was complete, and he had watched every step, unable to stop it, unable to follow. As months passed, Daniel learned how to live with regret, not as punishment, as permanence. It stayed with him quietly, like a shadow he couldn't outrun. And somewhere else, in a life built on intention and self-worth, she woke up each day without the weight of betrayal on her chest. She had survived, she had risen, and she had done it without looking back. Regret changes shape when hope finally dies. At first, Daniel's regret have been frantic, filled with panic, explanations, and the belief that if he said the right thing, something might still be saved. Now it was quieter. He no longer believed in rescue, only in acknowledgement. He reached out to her less frequently, not because he didn't want to, but because every unanswered message taught him something new about boundaries. When she replied, it was brief, polite, final. No warmth, no hostility, just distance. The first time he truly begged, it surprised even him. It wasn't planned. It happened on a rainy afternoon when he dropped the baby back at her place. She thanked him, took the child inside, then paused at the door. "Did you need something?" she asked kindly. The kindness undid him. "I ruined everything," he said suddenly. "I know I did, and I don't expect forgiveness. I just—" His voice cracked. "I need to know there's a version of this where I'm not erased." She listened, didn't interrupt, didn't look away. When he finished, she took a slow breath. "You're not erased," she said softly. "You're remembered accurately." The words landed with devastating clarity. He tried again weeks later, more carefully this time. Longer messages, reflections, admissions without excuses. She read them. She knew because he could see the read receipts. Her replies were gentle, but unmoving. "I believe you're sorry," she wrote once. "But being sorry doesn't undo becoming someone I can't trust." That sentence stayed with him. Daniel's emotional collapse didn't look dramatic from the outside. He still showed up, still functioned. But inside, Something had hollowed out. He no longer imagined a future where things improved, only one where he learned to live with what couldn't be repaired. He attended therapy, sat in rooms where no one knew his past, spoke honestly. "I want redemption," he admitted once. The therapist asked, "From whom?" He hesitated. "Myself," he answered finally. The room fell quiet. He realized then that redemption wasn't something she could give him. It wasn't something anyone could. It was something he would have to live without. Meanwhile, her life continued, steady, intentional. She was thriving in ways that didn't announce themselves. Confidence without arrogance, peace without performance. She didn't speak about him. She didn't need to. He existed now only in history. One evening, he asked her directly, "Is there anything I could do that would change how you see me?" She thought carefully before answering. "No," she said, "but that doesn't mean your life is over." The mercy in her honesty hurt more than cruelty ever could have. He walked away that night understanding something final. Regret could teach. It could humble. It could transform, but it could not restore what had been broken beyond trust. And that was the hardest lesson of all. Daniel learned that regret does not scream forever. Eventually, it settles. It becomes part of the furniture of your life, always there, always visible, but no longer demanding attention. That didn't make it easier, it made it permanent. He stopped hoping for reconciliation, stopped rereading old messages, searching for hidden softness. He began to understand that her boundaries were not punishment, they were survival. One afternoon, he watched her from across a park bench as she played with the baby. She laughed freely, uninhibited. There was no tension in her shoulders, no guardedness in her movements. She looked peaceful. And that peace, he knew, had been built without him. He approached slowly, not wanting to disturb the moment. "I'll give you space," he said softly. "I just wanted to say hello." She nodded. The exchange was brief, kind, detached. That detachment cut deep, because it meant she no longer needed to protect herself from him. She simply existed beyond him. Later that evening, alone in his apartment, he unpacked the last box. An old photograph fell out. Her, pregnant, standing in soft light, quiet, strong. He stared at the image for a long time. That was when the full weight of it hit him. He hadn't just lost her trust, he had lost the chance to grow alongside her. He whispered aloud, "I would do it differently." The room did not answer. Regret does not negotiate with time. He thought about reaching out again, then stopped, because he finally understood something essential. Wanting forgiveness does not entitle you to it. Her life, meanwhile, had expanded. New friendships, new routines, new laughter. She didn't pretend it had been easy, but she didn't relive the pain either. She carried it lightly now, like knowledge, not like a wound. One evening, Daniel sat in therapy and said the words he had avoided for months. "I accept that I won't be redeemed in her story." The therapist nodded. "And how does that feel?" He swallowed hard. "Honest," he replied. That honesty changed something. Not the past, but his relationship with it. He stopped trying to rewrite history, stopped framing himself as misunderstood. He saw himself clearly now, and clarity, though painful, was grounding. The last time he tried to explain himself, it was in a letter he never sent. He wrote everything, then folded the paper and placed it in a drawer. Some truths don't need witnesses. They need ownership. He no longer imagined a future with her. He imagined one where he lived responsibly, with humility, where he showed up fully for his child, where he didn't repeat the same harm. That would have to be enough. Regret without redemption taught him something he had never known before. Love does not always return. Sometimes it leaves behind wisdom instead. And wisdom, he realized, was the only thing he was allowed to keep. Acceptance did not arrive with relief. It arrived with stillness, the kind that follows grief when there is nothing left to negotiate. Daniel stopped measuring time by what he had lost. He began measuring it by what he could no longer undo. That shift changed everything. He showed up consistently for his child, not as a performance, not as penance, but as responsibility. He learned how to listen without expecting gratitude, how to be present without demanding connection. It wasn't redemption, but it was necessary. She noticed, not with praise, with quiet acknowledgement. That was all he would ever receive from her now. And somehow, it was enough. The last conversation they had about them happened unexpectedly. Not planned, not emotional. They were standing outside, the evening calm, the baby asleep between them. "I don't hate you," she said suddenly. He looked at her, startled. "I know," he replied. She nodded. "That's my closure," she continued softly. "Not forgiving, not forgetting, just not carrying it anymore." He felt something loosen in his chest, not hope, release. "I accept that," he said. And for the first time, he meant it without bargaining. She never asked for an apology again. She didn't need one. She had rebuilt her life without his remorse. That was her power. Daniel moved forward differently now. More careful, more honest, less entitled. He no longer imagined himself as the victim of consequences. He saw himself as the author of them. That clarity hurt, but it also grounded him. One night, alone, he reflected on the greatest irony of all. The woman he betrayed had given him the most important lesson of his life, without ever trying to teach him. Regret stayed. It always would, but it no longer defined him completely. It shaped him, and shaping, he learned, was the only gift regret ever offered. Her life moved on, not triumphantly, not vengefully, but fully. She loved deeply again, not necessarily another person yet, but herself. She trusted her instincts, honored her boundaries, chose peace over explanation. Daniel remained a chapter in her story, an important one, a painful one, but not the ending. And that was the truth he finally learned to live with. Some love stories don't end with forgiveness. They end with growth. And growth, once achieved, does not look back. Strength does not always look like victory. Sometimes it looks like peace that no longer needs explanation. Her life settled into something quiet and whole. Not perfect, not untouched by memory, but steady. Mornings began with routine instead of dread. Evenings ended with calm instead of questions. The baby grew, curious, observant, secure. She watched it all with a sense of presence she had never known before. This life was not imagined, it was built. She no longer thought of herself as someone who had survived betrayal. She thought of herself as someone who had chosen herself. That shift mattered. People sometimes asked, carefully, "Are you happy?" She paused before answering. "Yes," she said, "not because nothing hurt, but because nothing controls me anymore." She never spoke badly of Daniel. Not because she protected him, because she didn't need to define herself against him. He existed now as context, not influence. Daniel's life moved forward too, but more slowly, with fewer witnesses. He worked again, not where he once had, not with the same recognition, but honestly. He lived in smaller spaces, with quieter evenings, the kind of quiet that doesn't scare you anymore, because it has taught you humility. Loneliness became his companion, not the dramatic kind, the reflective kind. It followed him through grocery stores, through empty weekends, through moments he wished he could share, but couldn't. He learned how to sit with it. That was his penance. He saw her sometimes, at drop-offs, at events. She was polite, grounded, unreachable. She smiled easily now, not nervously, not carefully. That smile was the proof of everything he had lost. One afternoon, he watched her walk away with the child, confident, unburdened, and he finally understood the truth without resistance. She was not strong despite him. She was strong because she stopped carrying him. There were nights he still thought of her, not with longing, with clarity. He no longer imagined reconciliation. He imagined responsibility, showing up as best he could, knowing that love does not always return to where it was broken. Her life expanded naturally. New friendships, new possibilities, eventually new love. Not rushed, not desperate, chosen. She never told Daniel about it. She didn't need to. He could see it in her posture, in her ease, in the absence of fear. The last time they spoke beyond logistics, it was brief. "I hope you're well," he said sincerely. She nodded. "I am." That was enough. Years later, when the child was old enough to ask questions, she answered honestly, without poison, without protection, just truth, measured and kind. She refused to pass pain forward. That was her final act of strength. Daniel remained a lesson, a warning, a chapter that shaped the story but did not define it. And in the end, there was no revenge, no dramatic justice, just consequence. A woman who became whole, and a man who learned too late that love does not wait for regret.